Hi, I'm Bill Arnold. Thank you for listening to this podcast. There are many more podcasts available at myfaithradio.com. Your support makes this possible. Thank you. And now the guy that would never refer to himself in the third person. Bill Arnold would never do that.
Oh, don't you know, it's the Bill Arnold Show. It's Bill.
And a warm welcome to the Bill Arnold Show. I am so glad to be with you today. I don't know what kind of day you've had, but I love being here in the studio. It's nice and cool. And as a radio host that gets to talk to a lot of people, I develop who I feel like I'm a big fan of. And Jim Wallace is one of my fans. I'm a fan. I'm a fan. So head over to coldcasechristianity.com and check out any number of his books. You won't be at all... you'll be happy you'll get any one of them. I'm looking at Case Files, Murder and Meaning. That's his most recent. The Truth in True Crime, Person of Interest, Cold Case Christianity. There's a whole number of books. Avail yourself to these resources. Buy his books. Enjoy them. Grow from them. You will learn a lot, and you will enjoy them tremendously. I know I have, and I give you my endorsement for anything that that he does. But go to coldcasechristianity.com. You can check out the podcast, the writings, the videos. You will enjoy it. I know I have. So how about that for an intro, Jim?
Wow. You can see this is... So in exchange for that amazing intro, let's do an interview. I feel like I owe you one now.
We
so
can.
I better do good.
Yeah.
Do good here.
I want to hear about your summer. I assume you're in Alaska right now.
No, we're getting ready to go back in a couple of days. This is where we do the Billy Graham Association's got a marriage resiliency retreat for police officers, and we get to go up there and serve in that amazing location. But just an amazing the fact that they have a heart for to do this kind of work, and it's almost always officers who have been involved in traumatic injuries. Some of them are retired because of these injuries, and a lot of it is about people searching to figure out, like, who am I now? Now that I've been either maybe for sure too injured to do that job, but then the question becomes, am I too injured to do any job? And you know how often we put our identity in our work. So then the question becomes, well, who am I now? Like, what do I do? Like then this is more an existential problem than it was just a practical problem, because sometimes they might be in a financial situation where they might be okay. The really issue is, what do I have to get up in the morning for? What do I have to live for? And that's really what we're trying to do there is put people, and sometimes people will come up and they're believers. They're people who maybe were raised in the church, but they really have never put their identity in Christ. And so this is one of the things we talk about a lot is identity formation, and how do you even begin? Especially since most of us would say, well, no, we are Christians, but we've never really thought about how that impacts our identity in terms of practically speaking each day. You know, you get up in the morning because the things you love are the things you become. The things you want to associate with are the things that usually you worship. You put your identity in those things. And for a lot of men, it's probably true for a lot of women too, you're going to put your identity in the things that occupy most hours of your day. Those are the things that you would say, that's why I get up to do this thing. And then at some point, this thing's not available to you anymore, and you're wondering, well, then why even get up? Like, what's the point of all this? And so that's kind of a lot what we talk about up there.
You have trained me, Jim, to listen to you very carefully when you say we're getting ready to leave to go to Alaska to serve. I know I'm getting to know your heart better and better, and I think you do role model stuff for me, just so you know.
Well, I don't know that, I just dumbed into this because it was one of those situations where, I started writing books toward the end of my career. And then I had about a decade there in my 50s where I was able to write and speak and do all of that. And at the end, about the middle of that, my wife said, look, we're not even volunteering anymore. And we were church leaders who were always volunteering at least once a month in some major way, someplace in a local ministry. And we had kind of moved away from that because we were no longer leading a church, leading a small group. And because I was writing and speaking and traveling so much. And so we started serving with Operation Heal Our Patriots, and really just served in housekeeping and in maintenance. And that grew into this opportunity to chaplain. Especially after George Floyd, it was really a matter of, well, is there a need that we could meet, given our multi-generational background in law enforcement? So that's really how we came into it. And without Susie wanting to do it, I don't think I would have probably been so focused and head down on what I was trying to accomplish with the writing. And that's why it's important, I think, for us to. It's taught me a lot, right? Because it's taught me a lot about the value of volunteerism, and I had forgotten. You get in seasons where you volunteer more or you volunteer less, and so if you're one of those seasons right now and you're listening to us, it turns out that notion of doing something that you will not be compensated for is a super important aspect of life. Especially the Christian life. And if you find yourself in a season where you really haven't done something like that in a while, it's important to make it part of your ethos, right? Because it really does change the way you see the world.
Mm-hmm. And not only, are you serving and possibly not being compensated, but it's costing you because you're away from your home, you're away from your grandkids, you're away from your...
Well, look, no matter what you do, you're not going to outserve the servant who served us. So it's like this feels like it's like we shouldn't even be talking about it because it's silly to compare anything we might do here on earth to what has already been done for us. And that's really how the gospel ought to change everything, right? Because we ought to have a sense of gratitude that comes from knowing what's been done for us, that then ends up creating grateful people who are willing to do it for others. And that's a pride issue for me, and it's a humility issue. Like you have to say, okay, look, most of the time, people who are prideful think things are owed to them rather than they ought to serve others. So you have to kind of shift that thinking. And it sounds easy, and I think I probably do it about 1% of each day. I mean, it's just the nature of how we are. We're wired to be self-protective and self-serving, and it's the self, right? Dying to the self is the biggest challenge, I think, of the Christian life.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of just persecution, too, I was reading an article over the weekend that Christians are disappearing for worshiping a god other than Xi Jinping, and that state police have been arresting thousands in China's underground churches. They pretty much pull you out of your home and take you to prison.
Yeah, and we take it for granted.
Yes, we do.
And isn't it interesting that at least in the earliest centuries of the church, when it was still it was not accepted, even the Jewish groups in the Roman Empire at least received the kind of deference that was not offered to Christians, and it was in those centuries that we had explosive growth. So it does seem to me that I see this even in the country today. If you're raised in a part of the country where Christianity is very comfortably accepted as the norm, and everyone goes to church on Sunday and all that, you're far more likely to take your Christian beliefs for granted than you are if you're in a place where it's very skeptical, maybe more urban, more secular, and in that environment, you're going to have to really figure out how to navigate your workplace, because not everyone's going to be a Christian, and you're not going to take it for granted. You're not going to be lukewarm in some sense. You're going to have to either be on fire or get out, because here there's no place for apathy, because you're going to put yourself in harm's way in those kinds of secular areas, and so you're probably not going to be apathetic. You're probably going to either be sold out or just out, and that's why I think we take it for granted sometimes that this country has made us too comfortable. Mm-hmm. We just assume that it's going to be the same way it was always. We're going to assume we have these freedoms. And of course, that's not always the case.
Mm-hmm. Said in the article, Jim, Mr. Xi's ruthless campaign against these underground churches aims to ensure the survival of the Chinese Communist Party. It's the emperor playing God. Mr. Xi wants to be exclusive. He doesn't want to have anything treated or worshipped more superior than him.
But isn't that just the human condition?
It is.
We can apply it to this to any dictator, to any king in the history of kings or dictators. But to be honest, it's really just describing the condition of each of us. Is that most of the time, those three things we always talk about that are behind any type of refusal of a truth claim. It's either going to be a rational refusal, we don't think there's enough evidence for it, an emotional refusal because we've had a bad experience, maybe with somebody who's a Christian or called themselves a Christian, and the last one is volitional, that we just don't want it to be true because we are enjoying the fact that we're in control. I say this all the time, that it's really easy to throw the dart against the wall and then just go draw the bullseye wherever the dart lands. Because it turns out that if you're in control of where the bullseye is, you'll never miss it. But if there's something bigger than you that draws the bullseye, well, then you're going to find out how good you really are. And there's the problem, is that most of us want to see ourselves. And look, all of us who are Christians who are talking about these things, we're all the same way. Like, we're not any different. It's like I'll argue that my version of this interpretation from Scripture is the right version, or my version of whatever is the way, because we are, again, so self-focused. We want to be in control. And that's I'm reading through Scripture right now in Matthew 5, because our family does these 3-verse-a-day Bible studies. And so we're going to be getting ready to go through Matthew. So I'm trying to get ahead of everybody so that when we actually start, I won't have to be. I'll have some little bit of slack, So I'm about 5 chapters ahead of the family right now, and I'm in the Sermon on the Mount. There's a lot of stuff in the Sermon on the Mount that I don't like. It's a lot of stuff that raises the bar. That seems like the holy standard of God is just. I can see why people would not find it popular. Like, we would like to be in charge of the standard, and not have the standard be something that's set that high. But the reality of it is, we're going to have to bend our knee to something other than ourselves. And if you're the kind of person who's just never going to be comfortable doing that, then this is probably not for you. Mm-hmm. So don't think it's because it's not true. It's just that you don't want to bend your knee.
Jim, when you talk about control, I have to think of Luke 15 and the 2 lost sons. Was the older son trying to control his dad by doing everything right?
Well, isn't it funny how we are always interested in manipulating our appearance?
Always.
Right?
You owe me because I've obeyed.
Yeah, it's careful manipulation of how we appear to others. We often talk about this with couples in this marriage resiliency retreat in terms of how kindness is expressed, right? Like, it's really easy to be kind to strangers, or to express kindness in the presence of strangers, right? Because they don't get under your skin. They don't know your stuff. It's so much harder to express kindness in the home, where everyone's got your history. Everyone knows how to push your buttons. Like, you take things for granted. This is the one place I should be able to be a jerk and not be treated harshly, because where are you going to go? This is our family, right? But it turns out that all kindness that's expressed publicly is really little more than just image management, right? Because we're managing how we look to others, and that's our first instinct, I think, is to manage our images, and this is what happens in the parable of the lost son, right? Mm-hmm. So I think in the end, you're right about what it would. So there's a certain aspect of integrity that you see as I'm going through the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5, that it comes down to, like, he's always weighing how people want to look in front of others versus who they really are from a perspective of integrity. So your vows, for example, you take these vows and you take them because you don't want to take them to God. Because you want, I'll vow before heaven or before Jerusalem or before anything on earth, because you're trying to find a way to be able to escape the vow at some point. You don't want to vow it to God and be beholden to it. So you find something lesser that kind of gives you look good. It looks like you're actually making a holy vow, but in fact, you've allowed yourself an escape clause in there, right? How about this? Just be the kind of person of integrity that you don't need a vow to begin with. When you say something, people go, yeah, he's going to do it. Right. Because he always does it. He always has done it. It's not a matter of how you look. It's a matter of how you know you are on the inside. Mm-hmm. And so there's always this sense that, God is calling us to stop with the appearances, stop with just this looking better on the outside. And this is about humility, right? It's really easy for me, Bill, to find someone horizontally to compare myself with that I can do things better than.
Right.
Like, right. I'm a better guitar player than somebody,
Yeah, oh, for sure.
But if God plays guitar, I guarantee I'm not going to be as good as him. So it's like we got to stop comparing ourselves horizontally. We got to start to compare ourselves vertically, and that's I think where humility. This is what Spurgeon says, right? It's just a proper assessment of who you are before a holy God. That's really what humility is. Something you can't pursue. You just have to realize it.
A friend of mine and I were chatting the other day about how self-focused we can be, and if someone shows you a picture of a group of people that you're in, the first thing you do is you zoom the picture out to see how you look in it.
Oh, that is so true. So for example, I can't tell you how many times we'll take pictures with our grandkids, and we're so upset that there's not a single good pic. Of course, there's thousands of good pictures of the kids. We just don't like how we look with the kids, right? So we're even willing to skip past the pictures where the kids are as cute as can be.
Right.
Because we're just looking for one where we don't look as bad as we really look, you know? So that is just the reality of self-focus, right?
Yeah.
And that's real. I think sometimes the way that God manages that is he steals it from you altogether. Like he just knocks it up. So, and is that what you want? How about either you're going to surrender this self-focus, or he's going to do something that forces you to surrender it. So that's why sometimes things happen to us, and we're like, why would God allow this to happen? But look back and say, would you have ever changed in this way, short of this dramatic thing that God has to do? Probably not. I mean, this is the kinds of things that have to be wrestled from your clutching hands, basically.
Yeah. All right, we're going to take a short break and come back. Jay Warner Wallace is my guest. Learn more about him at coldcasechristianity.com. If you have a question or comment, the text line is open, 877-933-2484. Wyatt will have us back in 90 seconds. We carry each other's burdens. Please know you can bring us your prayer concerns and we will pray. Share your prayer requests with the Faith Radio team by texting or calling 877-933-2484 or share your prayer requests with the Faith Radio staff and listeners at myfaithradio.com. I'm back with Jay Warner Wallace. You can learn more about him at coldcasechristianity.com. Jim, I'm going to ask this question with a little trepidation because this is might step on some toes, but there is, God obviously allows suffering in this world, but why doesn't God allow more suffering? I mean, most of us have it pretty good. We were talking about the persecution in China, but I think there are a lot of people that have, pretty nice lives. And I think that comfort is not as... I think comfort is spiritually more dangerous than suffering.
Yeah, well, there's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
And I a couple of things on here. You're right in the sense that comfort doesn't typically drive us anywhere. If you just look at it, if the Vikings are out there and they have a season where they've won the first 13 games and they've won them handily because maybe they haven't played a team yet that's really going to challenge them. And then they get to the 14th week and now suddenly they're behind by 20 points, 21 points, and it's the third quarter. They may not know how to come back because they haven't been tested in that way for 13 weeks. And that lineup hasn't been tested. So now in the 14th week, they're finally going to have to either rise to the occasion and learn how to come back when they're 21 down. And if they do, then they're going to be able to do that in week 16 because they've learned how to do it. But there's a good chance, because they've never had to do it this entire season, that they may not, because they're in uncharted territory. The same thing happens, I think, for us. It turns out all of the things that you and I would say, even if we weren't believers, if as an atheist, I would have said that the most important attributes of culture that I want to see in my own children as an atheist would have been courage and compassion and forgiveness and patience. And these are virtues, I don't care who you are. But those are not virtues that you get by flipping a switch. I cannot just teach my kids the definition of these words, and then voila, they actually possess those attributes. It turns out every one of those is a response. Courage, if you don't face danger, you'll never develop courage. You'll know it as a definition, but you'll never actually be it until you face the danger. I'd have to put you in a world And that's why dads often with their kids, they expose them to little, percentages of danger that they can control because they want their kids to learn to become courageous. Courage is a response to danger. Forgiveness is a response to transgression. If there's no transgression to forgive, charity is a response to poverty. All of these things we want people to be charitable, forgiving, compassionate, courageous are all responses to things like danger and suffering and transgression and poverty. So it turns out if you wanted to design a world in which the best that is possible of humans could ever emerge, you'd have to design the kind of world that looks like the one we have, full of danger and full of transgression and full of all the things that now why is that there are seasons? It's not going to last forever. There just are these seasons when you don't seem to have that kind of suffering. And we often see that when that happens, a culture can become quite soft. And then it's vulnerable to all kinds of stupid because it's never really had to deal with stupid at that level. So it becomes vulnerable. Well, you got usually ask the question, why did Jesus get 3 years before he was driven to the cross? Why wasn't it only one? Why did he get 2 more years where he wasn't being chased and pursued at the level? Because it turns out that Jesus was in charge of the timing of those 3 years all along. He knew when it was time and when it wasn't time. God's also in charge of the entire, and by the way, none of those disciples understood Jesus's timing until they looked back at it after the resurrection. And they saw, here's how it fits. We even know now, 2,000 years later, what place it holds in history by looking back in hindsight. A time is coming when we're going to understand why there were periods of comfort and periods of oppression, because it's part of God's overarching story. And every story has ascending action and a climactic moment and descending action. All of that stuff is part of God's story of history also. And when it's all done, we'll see why in given locations across the planet at given times, there were times of either oppression or suffering or comfort, all of which built towards some greater end.
That's fascinating, Jim. I'm not asking for God to bring any suffering into my life right now, but when I have gone through periods of suffering, I know that I end up on my knees way more often than usual.
Well, isn't that a shame? But isn't that so true?
It is, yeah.
I mean, and that's something that I have had to shake and had to really wrestle with. And I think it's because I was such a detail-oriented skeptic, skeptical about people. That's how you investigate cases, and detail-oriented is how you make cases in front of a jury. And so that's that those two sides of me, the detail-oriented skeptic that overthinks everything and has to really kind of work the case together and bring it together yourself. The one thing that I've struggled with as a Christian is that reliance on prayer. That my first thought is do what you need to do. Like you have to make this happen. We got a deadline. We got to get on this. We got to work. And because that was always my view. It's my first inclination is, okay, we got this problem. Well, what are we going to do about it? What do we have to figure out? Like we have a domino that has to fall 20 dominoes from now. We got to figure out what the first 4 dominoes are going to be. Mm-hmm. That's always been my view of any case. Like we're in charge of making sure the dominoes fall a certain way. So now as a Christian, I'm very much, I gotta remind myself, I've got to actually make an intentional effort to surround myself with people who will pray. One of the things I love about working with BGEA up in Alaska is that I'm surrounded by volunteers and staff people who are prayer warriors. They are, people will say when they come up there, man, you guys pray about everything. Well, that's not my first inclination. My first inclination is to work about everything. But mm-hmm. I love being surrounded by people whose first inclination is to ask God. Because I know that I'm the kind of person that God will eventually say, okay, enough of you. I'm going to put you in a place where you don't have any choice. And nobody wants to be in that place. But it often is a place of suffering because you run out of the ability to help yourself.
Mm-hmm. And Jim, I didn't bring this topic up to in any way trivialize suffering, because I know there's people listening right now that are in the midst of intense suffering. And I'm just trying to put it in a context in light of eternity. And I know that when I cry out in pain to God, I am on my knees and I'm probably exactly where I should be. And I'm always really at the end of the day glad I'm there.
Well, and you just said it. It's in the context of eternity.
Right.
Eternity changes. We talk about it all the time. Eternity changes everything.
Yeah.
And if you really believed that there's an eternity waiting for you in which there will be no suffering, you could probably endure a lot more. And I think part of the problem is that we know this is true from Scripture. We know there is an eternity waiting for us in which there will be no tears. Yet we live practically as though that isn't the case.
Yeah.
Like we live like atheists when we claim to be Christians. And that's part of the problem for me too, is that too many years, 35 years, I'm not even halfway through my life having been a Christian. I've still been an atheist more than a Christian. And I still sometimes carry those things over.
Mm-hmm. All right, Jim, I've got a question from some J. Warner Wallace fans, and it's this. From Jim's study of the Gospels and his detective skills, could he tell when Jesus' earthly father, Joseph, may have died? Kind of a speculative question. I don't know if you've ever poked around that territory.
Yeah, well, I have a little bit, just because I think it's fascinating. For example, if I just was, one of the things we were doing also is that I always tell the officers to come up, who maybe are not Bible readers, start in John. Well, if you look at John in John chapter 1, there's a moment when Nathanael calls Jesus. Philip is describing to Nathanael, or maybe it's Nathanael responding, saying that Jesus is the son of Joseph. Very rare to hear that in Scripture. In Luke and in Matthew, he's described as the son of Mary, but never described as the son of Joseph. Mary is his mother. Joseph is never described as his father, because, of course, his father is God. Mm-hmm. But Nathanael has a misperception. He, number one, thinks nothing good can come out of Nazareth, and he doesn't understand the prophecies related to Nazareth. And two, he also thinks that Jesus is a Messiah, perhaps, but not divine. He's just the son of Joseph. And of course, right after that, Jesus is going to correct him in both regard. He's going to show him something divine. He's going to read his mind. And two, he is going to there'll be a prophecy, and you see not in John, but you'll see it in Matthew, the prophecy about Nazareth. So the whole point is, there's a sense in which Joseph is seen as something just human early on, and Jesus is just the son of Joseph. I do think what happens is Joseph is never described in the gospel. So you're right. You can kind of, the last time you see Joseph being described appears to be when Jesus is around 12, and they're at the Jerusalem temple, and they return from Jerusalem, and Jesus is missing. But you really don't see another sign of Joseph afterwards. Every time that Mary appears after that, she's without Joseph. Even when she's with her own children, Joseph is nowhere to be found. So I don't think we have enough certainty. You can put that range. It's going to be after the age of 12 and before the age of, say, 30 or 30, say 31, that first episode where you've got Mary alone without Joseph. So you probably have like an 18-year gap in there. And somewhere in that 18 years, Joseph has not only many children with Mary, but passes away. I don't know if you can really kind of narrow it down any more than that,
Yeah. Was Jesus commonly known as the son of Joseph? Because like you said, it only appears once in John 1:45.
That's right. No, that's what's so interesting about it. Remember what I'm looking for, and I've started podcasting quite a bit about these little incidental details, little things, little tells that are often, what you're looking at with a forensic statement analysis is, given all the ways I could describe Bill Arnold, well, how do I describe him? Do I call him Bill, my friend? There's lots of different ways I could describe you. Mm-hmm. And so you're not just looking at how I'm describing you. Look at what the alternatives were. And so that's what I'm looking at there. As soon as I read that, and it just pops right out. Son of Joseph? Who calls him the son of Joseph?
Right.
Well, the fact that it's connected just by a few verses to a response that Jesus is going to make, that is going to help illustrate the fact that I'm not just the son of Joseph. That's a misconception. And he's about to make that clear. So I think that that's a standout, and that's not how he's described. He's described as the son of Mary. Mm-hmm. Mary is the mother of Jesus, but you'll never see that expression applied. Let's put it this way: Jesus will never use it to describe Joseph.
That's true.
And the gospel authors will never use it to describe Joseph. But coming out of the mouth of Nathanael, that's a misconception.
Yeah, and then
and you'll, I'm sure, hear that coming out of any of his detractors, like the Pharisees. They're going to call him something other. They're going to minimize who he is. But the reality of it is, you'll see that Luke and Matthew are very clear. They're very careful. That go back and read the first 2 chapters of Matthew and see how Joseph appears in that.
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, Joseph and Mary were alive when Jesus was 12, reading left behind at the temple.
Yep.
So,
and then you have without Joseph, probably in the first year of Jesus's public ministry, and he's probably 30-ish.
Yeah. So
you have somewhere in that 18-year gap, Joseph is going to pass away.
Yeah. Wow, fascinating. All right, I'm going to take a little break. J. Warner Wallace is my guest. If you have a question, let me know what it is. The text line is open, 877-933-2484. And also check out coldcasechristianity.com. That's Jim's website. You will find tons of resources, much of them free. You will enjoy it tremendously. We'll be right back. My guest today is J. Warner Wallace. Go to coldcasechristianity.com to learn more about Jim. So Ginny and Gary chimed back in, Jim, and said Matthew 13:55 says, "Isn't this the carpenter's son? Isn't his mother's name Mary, and aren't his brothers James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas?" So there's a reference to the carpenter's son, not his father.
Yeah,
but
no doubt.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So here's what so that's a very good point. So when my dad dies, he's still alive, but I'll still be the cop's son.
Of course you will.
And that's the problem. So it doesn't really tell us that he's alive.
Right.
It just tells us that he's the carpenter's son. But here's what's interesting: Joseph is physically missing from that scene. So of all the people that I'll give you an example of this at the crucifixion. So Mary's at the crucifixion. Well, where's Joseph?
I know.
You don't think Joseph would be there if it was? I think he would as the father. Mm-hmm. I would expect to see. So sometimes what you see is not an absence. An absence doesn't really prove anything. It's an absence when you would expect a presence.
Right.
That to me is more telling. So there are several places in the New Testament canon where the family, siblings, mother of Jesus are assembled for some purpose. Yet, and yet there's no. So, for example, to say that he is the son of Joseph, let's say all the brothers died too, you would still say, isn't this the son of the carpenter and the brother of so and so, so and so, so and so, so and so? Because it's describing Jesus as the focus. He still is. It's not describing Joseph or the brothers. Mm-hmm. You see what I'm saying? The focus is on Jesus. Jesus is still. If you were saying, isn't Joseph the father of Jesus? Well, now the focus is on Joseph. So now you can argue, well, maybe Joseph is still alive. But when the focus is on Jesus, to say that Joseph is his father doesn't mean that Joseph is still alive. And I think I would expect to see him at some point in several of those episodes in the New Testament Gospels where the family is present, also at the crucifixion. Also, remember, there's a scene in Acts chapter 1 in the upper room where everyone's assembled. And in Acts 1, verse 14, Mary is present. But Mary's there. Mm-hmm. But she's not mentioned anywhere else in Acts, but Joseph's never mentioned there. Mm-hmm. So and this is why every single tradition, now there is, I think, some non-canonical apocryphal books that try to develop like devotional views of Joseph as an old man, but those are not historical. They are very late, and they are clearly devotional, and I don't think you can trust any of that. This is why if you look at Catholics, if you look at Greek Orthodox, and if you even look at the Protestant view, they pretty much agree that we know he's going to pass away somewhere between that 12-year-old Jesus in Jerusalem and the public ministry of Jesus. Mm-hmm. So I think that's let's put it this way. Historically, that's our safest bet to say that.
Yeah. Yeah. Plus, we have forever relationships. And like you said, you'll always be the cop's son. Right. So because it's just a descriptor. It's a descriptor. If you knew the carpenter, and clearly they didn't even use his name. They knew he was well known enough to be able to use him as a data point. Isn't that the carpenter's son? That's so interesting. Yeah. Right. So they knew he was the carpenter. That's again of all the ways he could have described him. They didn't describe him as Joseph. Isn't that Joseph's son?
No, apparently Joseph was pretty well known as a carpenter, and that's the carpenter's son. But that doesn't mean the carpenter's still alive.
Right. All right, I'm going to shift gears here with you, and I don't know if you're willing to talk about this, but we brought up the topic of Tyler Robinson, the accused shooter of Charlie Kirk, and I know there's been some more developments in the case. Is that anything you would be open to discussing?
Yeah, I think that what's interesting about the Tyler Robinson case, now we've had a prelim, and everyone doesn't really understand what a prelim does. And I guess it's been talked about a little bit, but we have those in California. It's not in every state. Do you have a prelim? Sometimes people are brought to trial by way of a grand jury. I have done cases, cold cases, that have been brought to trial through a grand jury. But what they basically do is that before we have a trial, which can be very expensive, very costly, very time sensitive, the courts want to determine, hey, do we have good reason to believe this is worthy of a trial? Is there enough probable cause to bring this to trial? Now, at trial, of course, the level of conviction is going to have to be beyond a reasonable doubt. But in a prelim, it's just about probable cause. Do they have enough probable cause to proceed? So you're not going to get the entire evidence set. As a matter of fact, we're going to be very strategic about what evidence we use. We want to convince a judge that this is worthy to continue without giving the defense everything to swing at. We're not going to pitch the ball right across the center of the plate at 30 miles an hour so that the defense can swing at everything. That would just be stupid. So instead, what we're going to do is give the judge just enough. And so you're not going to get everything, but we do now have a good picture, I think, of the kind of case this is going to be. And it's going to be like every case we've worked in cold cases. These are going to be cumulative cases built on both direct and indirect evidence. That's what every cold case, and my cold cases are almost all indirect evidence. Now remember, direct evidence is eyewitness accounts. Everything else is indirect evidence. So like blood spatter and ballistics and DNA and all of that stuff. That's all indirect evidence, and that's also called circumstantial evidence. The only thing that counts as direct evidence would be somebody who can testify as an eyewitness or video evidence, because video is kind of like the eye of the camera is like your eye, and then you tell it back what you saw. The video speaks back what it saw, basically. So in that sense, that yes, all video is direct evidence, and now what we're seeing is a pretty robust case on 4 different legs. Now, why is that important? Because it turns out that the more diverse the cumulative evidence is, like in other words, that it's coming from different fields of evidence, eyewitness testimony, video, ballistics, blood spatter, DNA. I mean, these are very different lanes you can travel in evidentially. And the more diversity you have in the kinds of evidence you're bringing, the more reliable the inference is that you've got the right guy. So that's why this is built so robustly, right? Like part of it is just going to be all of that text message stuff, all the digital communications, the handwritten note that was underneath the keyboard. These notes and texts back and forth are just one aspect, and they're all pointing in the same direction, right? You got the series of messages that Robinson sent back and forth to his partner. You've got memory. He told his partner to look underneath the keyboard, and then a picture was taken of that. So you have all of this and all this, the text messaging all aligns. Like there's no contradiction in all this different text messaging, whether it's a text to the live-in roommate, whether it's a text to friends, whether it's a post in a community, all of the text messaging aligns. In other words, it's all kind of saying the same thing and going in the same direction. That's important too, because if you had a variety of easily interpreted as completely opposite statements, well, then you can argue I'm misinterpreting it. But when you see that all the communication is kind of aligned, that gives you more confidence that you're making the proper interpretation. So you got that. You've got these verbal statements that he made, either to a family friend, to his own parents. And a lot of these were even statements that are, if not, a lot of them were just complete admissions of guilt. But even when they're not admissions of guilt, They are clearly said in a way that it demonstrates that he has a certain guilt. He's trying to, like, he's preparing people for what's about to happen, because he knows, it appears from his statements, that he knows that he is guilty. Something bad is about to happen because of something that he did. In other words, these verbal statements align with the text messages, even though they're different. Now you got something that's being text, something that's being written, something that's being communicated by written language. Now you got things that are being said, and these two things seem to align. Look at all the rifle stuff, all the ballistic stuff, all of that stuff is, and so much has been said about whether or not a round of that nature would have an exit wound. And I can tell you a couple of things. One is anecdotal, and one is just the reality of the distance in which it's being fired is going to have a big, I think this is like, what, 2 or 3 times longer than the Martin Luther King shooting. I think there's no exit wound on that either. So the idea here is that the further away that the round is being fired, the slower it's going to be when it penetrates the target. And it's going to have less opportunity to just go right through something. Also, what it hits once it's inside, and the kind of round it is. And apparently these were rounds that are designed to expand upon impact. And often we will use those in law enforcement too, where the round is designed like a hollow point round that easily opens up and slows down and can turn sideways and then not exit, because it's the kind of round it is. So that's the kind of thing that has to be taken into account. And that's the kind of round this was. So I think that all the talk about, oh, well, do we have an exit round? Why don't we have an exit wound rather? A lot of that, I think, has been put to bed by what's been testified to so far. I can also tell you anecdotally, I have been to so many autopsies involving shootings with any number of rounds. Because remember, in California, if you're working a homicide and you're the IO, you're the investigating officer, here's what they do. You have to go to the autopsy, because at the prelim, what you're seeing now, I have to testify for the coroner. So I have been to a ton of autopsies preparing to testify for that coroner at the prelim. And here's what I see. The rounds, you think, oh my gosh, I can't believe sometimes the travel pattern, once a round hits a body. It's going to depend on what it hits, the angle it hits at. It's impossible to predict. That's the problem. It's absolutely impossible to predict. So all this talk prior to this about whether or not there's going to be an exit round, I knew was going to be so utterly dependent on so many factors that nobody even talks about. I think now you're seeing this in this prelim. And the one last thing I'll say, you have all of the stuff that's related to, like DNA and what's on the roof that they can trace DNA back to, and how many points of comparison were taken. That you might say, well, look, there's a transfer DNA. Well, maybe if you've only got it in one location, and it's going to be really the percentage of DNA recovered from that one location. But what we're seeing here is a number of locations that are examined that show a pretty high level of DNA. And so any numbers they give you on TV, it's 1,000,000,000%, whatever it may be. This is a pretty solid case in terms of how much of his DNA they have on the roof. So this is, to be honest, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, this is like every case I've ever worked that was this slam dunk. I don't know really where to wiggle here in terms of this case.
Yeah. We're going to take a short break and be right back with J. Warner Wallace. Go to coldcasechristianity.com to learn more about Jim, and we'll be right back. It is my deepest desire that you take the very first step of faith by placing your faith and trust in Jesus Christ. If you've got questions about what it means to begin a relationship with Jesus, text the word faith to 41224. J. Warner Wallace is my guest. I'm so grateful that we're going to have this conversation today, because I just heard, I think your grandkids coming in, so you're going to get to go play with them when this is over. So all you have to do is stick with me about another 6 minutes, Jim, and then
you got it, brother.
Then you're off for a month. Yeah.
Yep.
So I loved the article you wrote at coldcasechristianity.com about discernment, and I would love for you to talk about the difference between hypocritical judgment and wise discernment.
Yeah, I mean, so much of the time you'll hear, how can we even judge? Even on this case, how can you judge somebody else? Are you allowed to as Christians? Are we at the point where we can't even we have no right to judge? Of course we do. Everything in Scripture, if you think about it, is a call for Christians to make decisions, discerning decisions about their own behavior, if nothing else. So it turns out, yeah, we are to be using our minds. We are to worship God with our minds. And what we're not to do is to be the kind of people who are harshly judgmental of others in a hypocritical way, which is why you'll see Jesus talk about, well, look, you've got this on. If the issue is bigger in your life than it even is in the person you're complaining about, take care of it in your life. Like, look at it this way. If you want to be mentored, I think it is important to be mentored by people who have made the same mistakes as you. And maybe they figured out a way on the backside of the mistake to return to what God has called them to be. But if you knew that this person was still languishing in the very thing he thinks he's mentoring you to help you with, I think you'd be a bit suspicious. I think you'd say, well, I'm not sure this guy can really help me because he doesn't seem like he's even handling it in his own life. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you want somebody to mentor you who has figured out, has conquered it. So now when he's giving you advice or making a call on your life, he's saying, here's what I see in your life. You can trust that, yeah, he's not hiding all this in his own life, right? Because that's not the kind of mentor you're looking for. You're looking for somebody who's yeah, I've experienced this, but I took care of it, and here's what God showed me that helped me to take care of this. Well, this is kind of what Jesus is talking about. Remove that log from your eye before you complain about somebody else's splinter. So it assumes, number one, that there might be something you need to remove from your life before you can be making a judgment call with somebody else. So the only people, it's not as though the only people who get to make judgment calls are people who are perfect, because who would be able to do it then? Nobody but Jesus. So the reality of it is, of course, we are going to have to, the nature of this kind of thing is we all got to recognize that what we have going on in our life that has to be removed so that we can be in a position where we can say, let me show you how I removed it in my life.
Oh, that's good.
So I think that's part of what we're being asked to do here.
Mm-hmm. But as Christians, we are called to use biblical discernment and just avoid just making judgments on people.
Yeah, this is, I think, the challenge all of us have, and it's a good challenge because the nature of God is such that he is described as the perfect fullness of truth and grace, justice and mercy. So we often will fall on the grace side and say, well, and God is love. So if God is love really then is expressed, God is equal to love. God is also equal to the fullness of truth and grace. So therefore, love is equal to the fullness of truth and grace, which means there'll be times when we have to be really graceful with people and really gracious with people, and times when we have to be discerning and just speak the truth and speak justly and just say it the way it is. Because the reality of it is that love without truth is just a meaningless platitude. But truth without love is just brutality. So we want to be able to balance both of those in their fullness. And discernment really is that. That's the call to the truth and justice side, right? There's just as many calls in Scripture. Paul's either going to say, hey, you guys are not gracious enough. You're not kind enough. Or he's going to say, you're not discerning enough and you're allowing heresy to thrive in your church. So it's this call to one side or the other, and humans, for the most part, we're out of balance. But yeah, to be discerning is super important, but you cannot do it without an attitude of grace and mercy, because then you're just being a jerk all the time. You're like the old man who's complaining about people being on their lawn. And it gets a lot easier, as you know, Bill, as we get older, right? Because it seems like everything irritates us, Yeah. It's like all we want to do is complain about things. Right. But the reality of it is that's when as I get older, the calls to grace and mercy were more important. When I was younger, the calls to truth and justice were more important.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's so interesting. When do you leave for Alaska?
We leave on Wednesday, and we're there for 3 more weeks. And this is now a 10-week program. We're only able to do 6. We did 6 the first 5 years, and now they're doing 10. So we have to kind of figure out who to cover us in the interim. Sure. But it's been just the greatest joy to be able to do that. I love that. So
Wyatt and I will be praying for you throughout the month, and look forward to having you back on when you're available.
Thanks, brother. I so appreciate you, and I'll say hi to the kids for you. Okay.
Oh, thanks, Jim.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Yeah. Bye-bye. J. Warner Wallace has been my guest, and I really do want to encourage you to go to his website, coldcasechristianity.com. He has a lot of resources. There are lots of videos and articles and podcasts and all the things that you can enjoy about his amazing thought process and brain and his deep love for the Lord and his skill at doing apologetics. It's the best. Hey, I don't know if you've downloaded the Faith Radio app. Go to your app store and check it out. I have to say, it's a beautiful app. I've got mine on my iPhone, and when you download it, you just can't believe how pretty it is. And you open it up, and it's very easy to navigate your way through it. And you can listen to Faith Radio live, or you can just check out the podcast. It doesn't matter where you go. You can download if you've got that Faith Radio app. So give it a try. And if you don't like it, it's easy just to delete it off your phone, but I'm pretty sure you'll keep it. That wraps up our show for the day and for the week. Thank you for supporting Faith Radio. See you next week. Thanks for listening. Programming like this is made available through your support. Information available at myfaithradio.com.